Hello Internet, where better to discuss the first two Frankenstein movies than under some electricity pylons. It seems appropriate to me. 1931 gave us a knockout 1-2 combination from Universal Studios of Dracula followed by Frankenstein, and the horror movie had arrived in style. It struck me watching Frankenstein, rewatching it, that it's impossible for a modern viewer to watch this film with any kind of understanding as to how the film impacted the original audience. Every aspect of this movie has soaked into our popular culture and popular conscience. Last week I saw an advert on TV for chicken nuggets that co-opted the It's Alive reanimation scene, the content and the look of it. There's no way I can ever get my brain into a place to understand the impact that James Whale's Frankenstein made in 1931. All we can be absolutely sure of is that the impact was huge. The movie terrified cinema-going audiences. It made such a star out of Boris Karloff, who in that movie was credited with a question mark, that by the time he returned for Bride of Frankenstein, the advertising campaign just had to refer to him as Karloff, and everyone knew that they were talking about the master that had given us the creature. What is still apparent and wonderful to the modern eye, to my eye, is you can see clearly in this film how German cinema around and just after the time of the First World War that gave rise to German Expressionism was now affecting art and cinema in the West. Expressionism, which was a reaction to the horrors of the First World War, meant that the way things were portrayed were not realistic. It was a reaction against realism towards the fantastical, whereby the external world was twisted and morphed to reflect the psychology inside the characters. Many German artists and filmmakers were fleeing Germany at the time. German Jews. The rise of the Nazi Party also gave rise to anti-Jewish sentiment and speeches, and a lot of people quite sensibly got while the getting was good, and they made their way, some of them to America, and some of them in the industry made their way to Hollywood. Other artists like James Whale just admired the work that had been coming out of Germany and wanted to emulate it and use it, and you can see it in Frankenstein with right at the start at the funeral scene with the angular hill and the tombstones and crosses at angles and the gnarled tree. Even more so later on in Frankenstein's laboratory, there's one shot in particular which struck me, from very high up the tower looking back down at the laboratory and Frankenstein there, and all the floorboards, rather than running in parallel and being uniform, are all shattered and at various different strange angles, making it look like Frankenstein himself was at the center of a strange angular sort of architectural spider's web. Jack Pierce gave us the design for the creature, but Boris Karloff gave us the character, fully formed, with no dialogue, and what began a real universal horror tradition, the sympathetic monster, the outsider that the audience empathizes with and sides with, and it's the townsfolk who are really the agents of destruction. And you couldn't have that without Karloff's portrayal of a mute intelligence slowly learning, but horribly learning, that humans are cruel and unkind, and the world that he has been born into loathes him and attacks him at every turn. It's painful to watch. Speaking personally as an animal lover and a dog owner, it's hard not to make that connection in my mind of an abused animal that just wants to plead and will come back to its owner again and again, only to be whipped and beaten. And it's incredibly sad. It's such a moving performance and a testament to the skill of an amazing actor. Now, James Whale did not want to do a sequel to Frankenstein. By 1935, he was able to parlay a deal with Universal that meant that if he gave them Bride of Frankenstein, he was able to negotiate an insane amount of creative control on the project, and it shows in a sequel that is bigger in every way and madder and just basically as mad as a box of frogs. Whale decided that if he was going to do a sequel, that he would just go for it, and he absolutely does. Personally, I think tonally the film is all over the place towards the start, and it takes its time to settle down. I'm not a big fan of the comedy Cockney characters, which are a staple of Universal horror movies. We've already seen one in the warden at Seward's Asylum in Dracula, but his role was very minimal. There's Millie, a comedy Cockney shrew type character that's all the way throughout this movie, and I was honestly hoping that the creature would strangle her. It's not to my taste, but I'm going to have to get to like it, because all of these films get peppered with very strange comedy Cockneys. Other creations, though, like Pretorius, the man who blackmails Frankenstein into creating a woman this time, are just darkly, gleefully wonderful. The scene where after his grave-robbing antics, he sets up a candlelight supper on the coffin of and beside the pile of bones of the woman whose grave he's just robbed, is so darkly gleeful that once the film settles down, I kind of forgive it everything that I didn't like about it towards the start. The creature evolves, the creature speaks in this. Karloff was against that, but the creature from Mary Shelley's book becomes very, very articulate. Not so articulate in this, but I don't know. I think Karloff's instincts were slightly off in this one, because if the creature didn't speak, we wouldn't have the absolutely wonderful moment towards the end of the movie where the creature comes face to face with his creator and just says, just wonderfully, one word, Frankenstein. The sets in this are bigger, they're more elaborate. The sets in the first film are amazing, but where there were maybe 4 or 5 standout sets in the first film, in Bride of Frankenstein you can double, if not triple that, and they're wildly more expressionistic. It reminds me, I thought twice whilst rewatching Bride of Frankenstein of Tim Burton. Firstly, it occurred to me that Bride of Frankenstein is to Frankenstein what Tim Burton's Batman Returns was to his original Batman. In the original Batman, just as with Frankenstein, the world is set, the rules are set, and in the sequel now they can go crazy. There's certainly elements of German expressionism in Tim Burton's Gotham in Batman Returns, and his Batman Returns is his Batman version of Bride of Frankenstein. More, bigger, crazier, and all tuned into this mad world that is siphoned directly from the brain of the director of the movie. The second Tim Burton thought I had came right towards the end of the film, when the bride, Elsa Lanchester, with her amazing performance, when she's raised up through the roof of the windmill, struck with lightning, brought down, reanimated, then clothed, and the camera pulls back and shows her in all her glory with her amazing Nefertiti hair with the white shock through it and her movements. I just thought that those 5 or 10 minutes of cinema are essentially a pure distillation of everything Tim Burton is about. I can imagine him as a little boy watching this film, amongst others. We know what his influences are, but here it's like, well, God, there's Edward Scissorhands, there's The Nightmare Before Christmas, there's Sleepy Hollow, there's Batman Returns. All there. Such a ridiculously influential movie, done with such panache and a kind of glee that doesn't really care what you're going to think about it. Sure, let's have a prologue with Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley and Lord Byron talking about the tale she's just told, which just happens to be Universal's Frankenstein rather than the actual book. Why not have Dr. Pretorius have jars full of little miniature King Henry VIII's and queens and bishops? Let's go absolutely bonkers. Let's have, in the middle of that, a moment of pathos where the creature picks up a skull from a recently robbed grave and looks at it as a potential and sees not only where he's come from, but sees within it the potential of a soulmate. The other thing the Bride of Frankenstein did was it brought us into the world of horror sequels and franchises. After that, Pandora's box had been opened. For the second time within the same decade, horror cinema would never be the same again. And in the next video, we're going to be looking at 2 Dracula sequels, Dracula's Daughter and Son of Dracula, the second and third movies in what would become the Dracula franchise, which would become the Universal Classic Monsters Monster Mash franchise. So stick around, join me for Dracula's Daughter and Son of Dracula, and then after that even more excellent monster madness. And you know what to do here.